Are you looking for a way to display key or button prompts? Or perhaps you want to provide users with the option to rebind their keys? Then input icons might be just the tool you need, as it supports both keyboard and gamepad inputs, and is also compatible with local multiplayer games. Let's get straight to it. In this first example, we will display bindings in a sprite renderer. In this scene, I've already created an object with a sprite renderer and a sprite prompt component attached. Let's assign the move action of our input action asset to the inspector of the component. Immediately, we can see a set of options allowing us to specify which binding of the selected input action to display. But first, let's assign the sprite renderer to tell the component where to actually display the binding. We can see that the sprite renderer automatically displays the keyboard sprite, which is previewed in the inspector. When we enter play mode, we can control our character with the WASD keys, and once we switch to a gamepad, the displayed sprite switches to the corresponding gamepad sprite. Currently, I have 3 different gamepads attached to my computer, and when I switch between them, the displayed sprite also changes accordingly. As of the making of this video, the tool supports Xbox, PS3, PS4, PS5, and the Nintendo Switch Pro controller. Other gamepads will, by default, display the Xbox icons, but you can set the fallback icons to anything you want. Additionally, if the system language is set to French, for example, we can observe that the displayed keyboard sprites change accordingly when we start play mode. The tool seamlessly supports QWERTY, QWERTZ, and AZERTY layouts, with special characters falling back to the QWERTY layout. Now let's delve deeper into the sprite prompt component. The first field serves as a reference to the action we wish to display. When we change it to an action with only non-composite bindings, the available settings in the inspector also adjust accordingly. The Search Binding By field determines how we locate the specific binding to display. Changing this to Binding Index limits us to using a slider to select a single binding. While convenient, this approach can be restrictive, especially if we modify the arrangement of the bindings, as configured sprite prompts will consequently change, which may not be desirable. Therefore, searching by binding type is often the preferred method. Next, we can select which device to display. Options include displaying only the keyboard sprites, only the gamepad sprites, or dynamically switching between the sprites of the device currently in use. For now, we'll skip advanced mode. In normal mode, the composite type is automatically determined and will use composite if any binding of the action is a composite binding. The binding type lets you select which direction to display if the action is a composite. Next, in case the action would have multiple control schemes, we would see sliders to set which control scheme to use for both keyboard and gamepad. And finally, if we still have more than one fitting binding left, we can select the desired one with another slider. Now let's delve into advanced mode. For some bindings, selecting the correct bindings for keyboard and gamepad will be easier in this mode, as we have separate controls for each. Here, we can choose the control scheme, the composite type with its binding type, and lastly, select between the remaining options of bindings. By the way, the image prompt component functions exactly the same as the sprite prompt component, but can be used to display bindings in UI. With input icons, we can also display bindings in TextMesh Pro components alongside other text. The advantage of using text instead of sprite renderers is that we can display entire composite bindings at once. Let's take a look at the text prompt component. Here, I have an object with a TextMesh Pro component and a text prompt component attached. Within the text prompt inspector, there's a text field used to override the text of the TextMesh Pro component. For instance, I could write something like, use ... to move, with the intention of replacing the dots with the bindings for the move action. To begin, let's click on the Add button below to add a reference to an input action. Then I'll drag in the move action. Similar to the sprite prompt component, we're presented with settings that allow us to choose the bindings we want to display. All we need to do now is replace the dots in the text field above with the tag input action. If you prefer to use a different tag, you can customize that in the Input Icons Manager scriptable object. As we can see, the upwards key for the move action has already populated the text. Just like with the sprite prompt component, I can select which direction I want to display by changing the binding type field. However, To display all suitable bindings of the move action to the player, the text prompt provides an additional setting called Action Display Type. It is currently set to Single Binding, but when I switch it to All Matching Bindings Single, the displayed sprites immediately show me the WASD keys. When we enter Play Mode and switch to the gamepad controls, the text prompt will only display the left stick, which is exactly what I want in this case. Since the move action also contains secondary bindings for both the keyboard and gamepad control schemes, I can use the slider in the inspector to display the second set of bindings instead. We can even take it a step further and display all available bindings of a device at once by selecting All Matching Bindings with Delimiters as our action display type. If multiple sets of fitting bindings are available, this setting will display all of them with a delimiter in between. You can change the delimiter to whatever you like as long as it's within the possibilities of TextMesh Pro. For example, you can adjust the size of the delimiter to make it a bit smaller, or you could change its color. If you're using other plugins like Text Animator for Unity, it's likely compatible with the text prompt component. All right, let's add another binding to display by clicking the Add button at the bottom of the text prompt component. This time, I'll drag in the jump action and add some text with another input action tag. However, for this action, I don't want to display every possible binding. So I'll select Single Binding as the action display type. If I wanted to select a specific binding to display, I could enable Advanced Mode for additional controls. Now, I can select exactly the binding I want, but I'll leave them as they are for now. Similarly, we can customize the display for the move action. I'll select All Matching Bindings Single, enable Advanced Mode, and for the gamepad controls, I'll select the last available binding group. Now, when I enter Play Mode, we should see our chosen bindings when we switch between keyboard and gamepads. In case the default sprites aren't very readable against the background, we have the option to select a different icon set for both keyboard and gamepad. To do so, simply drag in an already existing icon set. Input Icons comes with a variety of available styles to choose from. In this case, I might want to select the light style for the keyboard sprites. If the sprites don't show up in the TextMesh Pro text, but you see the sprite tag instead, you probably need to create the sprite asset for this icon set first. The easiest way to do so is to select the icon set and click the button at the top labeled Pack to Sprite Asset. Once this is completed, the sprites should show up. Sometimes you need to recompile or start the scene for the changes to take effect. The asset also includes valuable Rebind Prefabs. Let's take a closer look at them. Upon selecting the object, we can observe that the options in the inspector are similar to the sprite and text prompt components we explored earlier. It also takes a reference to the action we want to rebind, and the options below allow us to select the actual binding we want to reassign. Let's hit play and see them in action. The options panel in this example includes buttons for the keyboard controls, the gamepad controls, and buttons that switch their mode depending on the currently used device. Let's override some bindings. By the way, there's also a setting in place that allows you to select the desired behavior when binding to a key that is already in use. The default is to override the existing one, making the previous one empty. However, as of the making of this video, you can also choose to cancel the binding operation if another binding with the same key exists, or you can assign the new one while keeping the other as well. If you kept an eye on our prompts in the scene, you might have noticed that the displayed bindings automatically updated as soon as we assigned the new keys to our actions. Very nice. Is your game a local multiplayer experience? Then I have good news for you. With the release of Input Icons 3.0.0, there are now systems in place that allow you to display a different set of sprites for each player. This feature works seamlessly with a single control scheme for both keyboard and gamepads, where each player uses their own device. Additionally, it also runs smoothly when multiple players share the same device by having multiple control schemes in place. If you are curious, then check out my other video in which I integrated input icons into the Unity3D Tanks example project to display bindings for 4 different players. And that's it for this video. If you have any questions or want to provide feedback, feel free to join the discussion in the Unity forum linked below.